The cemetery gate in Lagos stood dark and silent at about 11:30 p.m. The air was cold and the street was empty except for 4 young men standing beside a black luxury jeep parked outside the gate. Their names were Tunde, Emeka, Sadiq, and Kola. Tunde owned the expensive jeep and stood near the driver's door, watching the road carefully. Emeka and Sadiq lifted 2 dirty sack bags from the ground with shaking hands, while Kola struggled to drag the third one closer. The bags were heavy and smelled very bad, making their stomachs turn, but they forced themselves to continue because they knew they must not be caught. Inside the bags were human skulls they had stolen from fresh graves. The cemetery guards at the gate looked at them and simply waved because they had already been paid to keep quiet. The young men quickly pushed the bags into the trunk of the jeep and shut it softly. Their hearts were beating fast with fear, but also with excitement because they believed what they were doing would soon make them very rich. They entered the jeep quietly. Tunde started the engine and drove slowly out of the cemetery area. Nobody spoke as they passed through the empty Lagos streets. The only sound was the engine and their heavy breathing. Each of them was thinking about the same thing. They had crossed a dangerous line that could never be undone. After driving for some minutes, they suddenly saw something ahead that made their hearts almost stop. There was a police checkpoint blocking the road. Officers with bright flashlights were stopping every car and searching them carefully. Tunde's hands tightened on the steering wheel. Emeka wiped sweat from his face even though the air conditioner was on. Sadiq and Kola looked at each other with fear in their eyes. The jeep moved closer to the checkpoint until they had no choice but to stop. A police officer walked toward them and shone a bright light inside the jeep, looking carefully at each of their faces. Tunde greeted him politely and said they were coming back from a party. The officer listened but still looked suspicious. After a short silence, he told them to step out of the vehicle and open the trunk for inspection. Fear entered their hearts like cold water. Emeka's legs felt weak as he stepped out. Sadiq whispered a silent prayer. Kola felt his whole body shaking. They knew once the trunk was opened, their lives would be finished. The officer walked to the back of the jeep and stretched his hand toward the trunk handle. Just at that moment, a white car suddenly spun past the checkpoint without stopping. Its tires made a loud screeching sound as it rushed forward. The police officers immediately shouted and ran toward their patrol vehicles to chase the driver. The officer who was about to open Tunde's jeep quickly waved at them to leave and join the moving traffic. Without wasting time, Tunde and his friends jumped back into the jeep and drove away calmly at first, then faster when they were far from the checkpoint. For several minutes, nobody spoke. Finally, Sadiq broke the silence and said they had nearly been arrested. Tunde replied that the spirits were already protecting them because they were serious about the ritual that would make them millionaires. They soon arrived at Tunde's expensive apartment in a high-class area of Lagos. The building was tall and beautiful, very different from the poor neighborhoods where some of them lived. They carried the sack bags into his living room and locked the doors tightly. The bags felt heavier than before, as if the weight of their actions had increased. Tunde called the herbalist who had given them the instructions for the ritual. The man's deep, rough voice came through the phone, asking if they had brought what he requested. Tunde confirmed they had 3 complete human skulls. The herbalist told them to bring the bags to his shrine early the next morning and warned them not to open them until they arrived. That night, the 4 young men could not sleep well. They lay on beds and sofas, dreaming about the wealth they would soon receive. Big houses, expensive cars, and beautiful women. None of them thought seriously about the danger of what they had done. Before sunrise the next morning, Tunde drove them out of the city toward a remote area surrounded by thick bushes and quiet villages. After a long journey on rough roads, they arrived at a strange compound hidden among tall trees. The herbalist was waiting for them at the entrance, wearing red and white clothes and many beads around his neck. His eyes looked sharp and powerful. He welcomed them and led them inside a room filled with smoke from burning herbs. Animal skins hung on the walls and strange signs were drawn everywhere. The young men opened the sack bags and removed the skulls with trembling hands. The herbalist examined them carefully and smiled with satisfaction. He told them they were brave young men and that the spirit would reward them with great wealth. Then he carried the skulls into a dark inner room called the shrine and told them to return in 7 days for the final ritual. The 4 friends left the compound with excitement in their hearts. During these 7 days of waiting, Tunde, Emeka, Sadiq and Kola could think of nothing else except the wealth that was coming. They gathered often at Tunde's apartment to talk about their future. Emeka said he would buy a mansion in Lekki and drive the latest cars. Sadiq planned to travel around the world and open big businesses. Kola said he wanted to buy land and build houses for rent. But deep inside he felt afraid and sometimes wondered if the ritual could bring danger. When he asked Tunde if there might be any bad consequences, Tunde laughed and told him that wealth always required courage. 2 days before they were to return to the shrine, Tunde took them to a very expensive nightclub in Lagos to celebrate their coming success. They spent huge amounts of money on drinks and food, attracting many young women who danced and laughed with them. For a few hours, they felt like rich men already, forgetting the skulls and the dark ritual waiting ahead. Finally, the 7th day arrived. Early in the morning, they returned to the herbalist's compound. This time, he took them straight to the shrine. The air inside was heavy and hot, and the walls were painted red with strange symbols drawn everywhere. In the center of the room were 3 red mats placed in a triangle, and beside each mat was a red clay pot. The herbalist instructed Emeka, Sadiq and Kola to remove their clothes and wrap red cloth around their bodies before sitting on the mats. Tunde was told to sit on a wooden stool and observe. The young men obeyed nervously. When Tunde leaned forward, he saw that each pot contained one of the skulls they had brought, now soaked in a thick red liquid that smelled terrible. The herbalist lit candles and began chanting in a strange language. His voice echoed through the room as he commanded Emeka, Sadiq and Kola to repeat the words after him. They did so even though they did not understand what they were saying. As the chanting grew louder, something strange began to happen. White smoke rose gently from the pot in front of Emeka. Soon, the same white smoke rose from Sadiq's pot, but the pot before Kola behaved differently. Thick black smoke began to rise from it, followed suddenly by a burst of fire that shot high toward the ceiling. Kola screamed in terror and jumped back. The herbalist stopped chanting immediately, his face filled with fear. Kola's body began shaking violently. He spoke in strange voices that did not sound like his own, mixing different languages and crying loudly. His eyes rolled back and foam formed around his mouth. Before anyone could stop him, Kola ran out of the shrine and disappeared into the surrounding bush, screaming as he vanished into the distance. Emeka and Sadiq stood frozen in fear, wanting to chase him, but the herbalist stopped them and warned that anyone who followed might also lose their mind because the spirits had rejected him. With heavy hearts, Emeka and Sadiq returned to their mats, while the herbalist removed Kola's burning pot and continued the ritual for the remaining 2. The white smoke from their pot rose calmly as he chanted for a long time. After many hours, he finally announced that the ritual was complete. He told Emeka and Sadiq that the spirit had accepted their sacrifice and they would soon become very wealthy. However, he also gave them a serious warning. He explained that they would receive great riches for only 5 years, and after that time, their lives would end because the spirits would claim what belonged to them. The 2 young men were shocked and silent for a long time, thinking about the terrible price, but the promise of wealth was too strong. Finally, they agreed to the condition. The herbalist wrapped each ritual pot in black plastic and gave one to Emeka and one to Sadiq, instructing them to hide the pots carefully in their homes where nobody could see them. Tunde drove Emeka and Sadiq back to the city and dropped them at their separate houses. Both young men lived in small, poor rooms in crowded areas of Lagos. They hid their ritual pots deep inside their wardrobes and waited anxiously for the promised wealth. For 5 days, nothing happened. They woke up each morning and checked the pots but found nothing. Fear slowly filled their hearts and they wondered if they had been deceived. But on the 7th night, something happened. A cold wind suddenly filled Emeka's room, even though his windows were closed. A ghostly figure appeared before his wardrobe, glowing faintly. At the same time, in another part of the city, Sadiq saw the same spirit in his own room. The spirit produced large black bags from nowhere and placed them on the floor before disappearing. With trembling hands, both young men opened the bags and discovered they were filled with bundles of naira notes, more money than they had ever seen in their lives. Their fear quickly turned to joy as they realized the ritual had worked. From that moment, their lives changed completely. Emeka and Sadiq began receiving new bags of money every 7th night. Within months, they moved into luxury apartments and bought expensive cars. They called Tunde to thank him for introducing them to the ritual, and he welcomed them into what he called the brotherhood of wealthy men. They spent their days enjoying the riches they had gained, visiting expensive clubs, traveling abroad, and living without worry. Yet, sometimes, in quiet moments, they remembered Kola, who had run mad into the bush, and the 5-year deadline that waited ahead. 2 months later, Emeka and Sadiq were living like kings in Lagos. Emeka bought a large apartment in Lekki with glass windows and beautiful furniture. Sadiq bought a mansion with a swimming pool and security guards at the gate. One afternoon, Tunde and Emeka visited Sadiq's house to celebrate their success. They drank expensive drinks and laughed about how far they had come from their poor lives. They spoke about the night they spent millions of naira in a club and how people now respected them because of their wealth. They made plans to travel to Dubai and South Africa and buy even more luxury cars. But deep in their hearts, a quiet fear remained. They knew their 5 years of wealth would not last forever. Sometimes they remembered the warning of the herbalist and the terrible fate of Kola, but they tried not to think about it too much. After 2 years of enjoying their riches, Emeka began to think about marriage. His girlfriend had stayed with him during his poor days, and he wanted to make her his wife before his time ran out. He proposed with an expensive diamond ring, and she accepted with tears of joy. They planned a very big wedding in Lagos with many guests, fine food, and beautiful decorations. Days before the ceremony, Emeka's family house was full of excitement. His younger brother and sisters were moving around the house, exploring every room. One afternoon, while Emeka was busy with friends in the living room, his curious younger brother found a set of keys and opened a locked room. Inside the room was the hidden red pot. The children saw a human skull floating in thick red liquid, surrounded by stacks of money scattered on the floor. They screamed loudly and ran back to the living room in fear. At that same moment, something strange happened to Emeka. He suddenly stopped talking and stared into space with wide eyes. His body became stiff, and then he began to laugh in a frightening way. He tore his expensive clothes and ran out of the house, shouting and laughing like a madman. His family and friends tried to stop him, but he escaped into the streets. The wedding was cancelled immediately. His bride-to-be collapsed in tears, unable to understand what had happened. From that day forward, Emeka was often seen wandering the streets of Lagos, talking to himself and living like a homeless man. His family tried hospitals and prayers, but nothing helped. The wealth that had once brought him joy had destroyed his mind completely. Meanwhile, Sadiq continued to enjoy his riches, but fear slowly filled his heart as the years passed. He could not forget the 5-year deadline. The ghost spirit still appeared every 7th night, bringing bags of money that he no longer cared about. He had more wealth than he could ever spend, yet he felt no happiness. He began drinking heavily and giving away money to strangers on the streets. As his final year approached, he lived in constant fear of death. He stopped attending parties and stayed alone in his mansion, waiting for the end. He often wished he had chosen a simple life instead of the dangerous wealth he had accepted. He thought about Kola, who had lost his mind, and Emeka, who had also gone mad, and he wondered if his own fate would be worse. On the final day of his 5th year, Sadiq woke up knowing his time had come. That night, as he lay alone in his house, the familiar cold wind filled the room. The ghost spirit appeared again, but this time it looked darker and more powerful than before. Sadiq could not move as the spirit came closer and entered his body. He screamed in great pain, and within moments, everything became silent. The next morning, his workers found him lifeless in his room. Tunde, who had first led them into the ritual, heard the news and became filled with fear. He realized that the wealth they had chased had only brought suffering and destruction. From that day, he abandoned such dark practices and lived quietly, always remembering the terrible price his friends had paid.
Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to like, subscribe, and comment below. Hit the notification bell so you never miss an exciting new tale. See you in the next one.